You've heard a gunshot before. Maybe in a movie, maybe from a video game controller in your hand, maybe, if you're unlucky, in real life. It's a sound built for one purpose: ending things quickly and completely. But that sound didn't start on a battlefield. It started with a group of monks trying to make death disappear forever. That's the real answer, and it's far stranger than you think. For most of human history, dying wasn't something you understood. It was just something that happened. No warning, no real explanation. Your ancestors watched people get sick and vanish within days. They watched infections take limbs. They watched childbirth become a coin flip nobody could control. So somewhere along the way, in nearly every ancient civilization on Earth, a single question took root and refused to leave. What if you didn't have to die at all? In 9th century China, that question had an entire profession built around answering it: alchemists. Not wizards, not magicians in the way you might picture them. Chemists, really, just centuries before the word existed. Their job was to mix minerals, metals, and organic material in search of one impossible outcome: an elixir of immortality. Sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter, a naturally occurring mineral you'd know today as potassium nitrate. Mix them in the wrong ratio, heat the mixture over a flame while trying to purify it into something drinkable. What do you actually get? Not eternal life. You get fire. Fast, violent, uncontrollable fire. And here's where the story stops being theoretical. Historian Joseph Needham, who spent decades cataloging the history of Chinese science, traced this discovery back to Taoist alchemical texts from around the 9th century. One of them reads almost like a warning label written in hindsight. It describes a mixture that had burned the hands and faces of the alchemists working with it, and it even burned down the building they were experimenting in. Sit with that for a second. The first recorded gunpowder accident in human history wasn't a weapons test gone wrong. It was a lab fire, caused by people who were trying to cheat death and instead created its opposite. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. For decades after that accident, almost nobody used this discovery to hurt anyone. It stayed a curiosity, a dangerous one, but still just a curiosity. The Chinese folded it into fireworks used at festivals and celebrations, the exact same explosive burst you now associate with New Year's Eve fireworks lighting up a night sky. Have you ever lit a cracker and felt that small jolt of surprise as it snaps? That reaction in your hand is the same base chemistry as a 1,000-year-old failed immortality formula. You've been holding a piece of history without ever realizing what it once was. So how did celebration turn into war? Slowly at first, then all at once. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Chinese military engineers realized this unstable mixture could be packed into something more than a hollowed bamboo for a festival. They stuffed it into hollowed bamboo and attached it to the front of a spear, creating what became known as a fire lance. It sprayed flame outward, sometimes mixed with shrapnel, directly at whoever stood in front of it. It wasn't accurate, it wasn't even particularly safe for the soldier holding it, but it didn't need to be precise to be effective. It just needed to be terrifying. Military historian Tonio Andrade, who spent decades studying this period in his research on what he calls the gunpowder age, describes how early Chinese armies deployed these weapons defensively, especially during long sieges. Picture a fortress wall under attack for weeks. Now picture that same wall breathing fire back at the attackers climbing toward it. That single moment, a wall that fights back with flame, was often enough to break the nerve of an advancing army. The technology didn't need to kill efficiently yet. It only needed to make death feel closer than it actually was. But knowledge like this rarely stays contained in one place. It travels with trade routes. It travels with conquering armies. It travels through captured cities and stolen manuscripts. Gunpowder moved steadily west along the Silk Road, passing through the Mongol Empire during its expansion, filtering into the Islamic world and eventually reaching Europe by around the 13th century. And in Europe, something unusual happened next, something most history classes skip entirely. A friar named Roger Bacon, writing sometime around the 1200s, described a formula for what he referred to as a child's toy. something that produced a bang like thunder and a flash like lightning when ignited. Historian Kenneth Chase, who wrote one of the most detailed global histories of firearms ever published, points out that Bacon may have deliberately scrambled the actual formula into a cipher buried within his writing. He seemed to understand exactly how dangerous this knowledge could become if it fell into careless hands. Think about that for a moment. One of the earliest scientists in European history to document this substance tried to hide it from the world. He understood nearly 800 years ago, something you still wrestle with every time you see a headline about a new and more powerful weapon. Some discoveries are not meant to be shared freely, and everyone who makes one seems to know it instinctively. It didn't matter in the end. The formula spread anyway. It always does. By the early 1300s, European blacksmiths figured out something the Chinese fire lance had never fully solved. Metal doesn't burn away like bamboo does. Metal can contain an explosion instead of simply channeling it. Seal one end of a metal tube, pack gunpowder inside, add a projectile in front of it, and you no longer have a fire lance spitting flame. You have something closer to a cannon. The first handheld versions of this idea were clumsy. Awkward metal tubes mounted on wooden poles, requiring two hands to hold steady and a separate open flame just to fire a single shot. They were loud, they were unreliable. Honestly, in almost every practical sense, they were worse than a well-crafted crossbow held by a trained soldier. So why did this clumsy new weapon end up winning? Here's the twist almost nobody expects, even after learning everything up to this point. Guns didn't spread across the world because they were better weapons. Not at first. They spread because they were dramatically easier to use. Think about what mastery used to require. A skilled archer needed years, sometimes closer to a full decade, to develop the strength and precision to use a longbow effectively in battle. A skilled swordsman trained for most of his adolescence and adulthood, refining footwork and timing that took a lifetime to perfect. But a farmer with no combat training at all could be handed one of these crude gunpowder weapons, shown which end pointed away from his own face, and turned into a genuine threat within a single afternoon. Warfare stopped being a contest of years spent mastering a craft. It became a question of how many hands you could arm at once, regardless of who those hands belonged to. That shift didn't just change how battles were fought. And this next part is the piece almost nobody connects to guns at all. It quietly rewired the structure of power across entire societies. Knights in heavy armor who had dominated European warfare for centuries because almost nobody could match their training, their horses, or their expensive equipment, suddenly found themselves vulnerable to a peasant who had never held a weapon before that same morning. The gun became, in a strange and unsettling way, one of history's earliest tools of equalization. Terrifying in what it enabled, democratizing in who it empowered. Both of those things were true at exactly the same time, and neither one canceled the other out. That equalizing effect didn't stop in Europe. It reshaped entire empires, and one moment in particular proves just how far this went. Historians often group the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire under a single label, the gunpowder empires, because all three expanded and consolidated power largely on the strength of early firearms and cannon. The Ottomans famously used massive siege cannons to bring down the walls of Constantinople in 1453, walls that had stood as effectively impenetrable for over 1,000 years. Stone and centuries of engineering, defeated in weeks by a substance first discovered by someone hoping to live forever. If you had told the alchemists who burned their workshop down that their mistake would one day topple the most fortified city on Earth, they wouldn't have believed you. Why would they? They weren't building weapons. They were trying to cure the one thing that terrifies every human being equally. There's also something worth noticing in the sound itself. Not just what a gun does, but what it announces. Unlike a sword or an arrow, a gunshot is loud enough to be heard from far away, sharp enough to trigger an immediate flinch in anyone nearby, human or animal.
That noise wasn't an accident of the chemistry. It was baked directly into why the weapon worked so well psychologically, long before it became reliably accurate. Early gunpowder weapons often missed their target entirely, but they didn't need to hit anything to work. The sound alone could scatter a line of soldiers or spook a row of cavalry horses. You are, in a very real sense, still living with a technology whose first job was never precision. Its first job was fear. So what does any of this have to do with you, standing in your kitchen right now or scrolling through your phone before bed? It's this. You live inside a world that was permanently shaped by an accident nobody meant to create. Every action movie you've watched, every video game controller you've held, every news segment discussing weapons policy, all of it traces back to sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter mixed together by someone chasing eternal life in a small workshop over 1,000 years ago. The very substance built to prevent death eventually became one of history's most efficient tools for causing it. That contradiction never fully resolved itself. It simply became more advanced generation after generation, technology after technology. And maybe that tells you something deeper about how invention actually works, far beyond just this one story. It's rarely a straight line running from an idea directly to its intended result. Somebody wants one specific outcome badly enough to spend years chasing it, and instead stumbles into something else entirely. The internet began as a military communication project, not a place to watch videos or talk to strangers. Microwave ovens came out of radar research meant for detecting aircraft. Even penicillin came from a scientist noticing mold he never intended to grow in the first place. Humans keep reaching for one outcome, and history keeps handing them another, and then spends centuries afterward deciding what to actually do with it. So the next time you hear a gunshot, whether it's in a film, inside a video game, or somewhere far more real than either of those, remember where that sound actually began. It didn't begin with a soldier standing on a battlefield. It didn't begin with a general planning a war. It began with someone in a quiet workshop trying to make death disappear forever. And here's the part that should actually stay with you. It worked, just not the way they had hoped.